The night sky lit up like a war zone, and I thought I was dreaming until the fire alarm screamed through the house and the crackle of flames met my ears like applause at a nightmare premiere. I bolted out of bed, barefoot on cold tile, adrenaline already spiking. Through the window, my workshop, my pride, my second home, and ironically the most secure building on my property, was ablaze. Not smoldering, not sparking, engulfed. A wall of flames roared with the intensity of a bad action movie finale, the glow lighting up the whole block, casting monstrous shadows of the neighbors gathering outside in a mix of robes, panic, and gossip-thirsty curiosity. But amidst the gasps and flickering sirens, one voice rose above the chaos. "I warned you about that dangerous shed. Now look what happened." It was Karen, of course, standing there in her neon pink robe like the queen of bad decisions. Arms folded, voice shrill. What she didn't know, what would make this the greatest plot twist of her HOA-fueled life, was that my workshop was under active FBI surveillance, and the moment she struck that match, she became a federal suspect. Hours earlier, things had been normal, or at least as normal as they ever get when you live 3 doors down from a woman who once called the city because a child's sidewalk chalk drawing looked too much like graffiti. I'd spent most of the afternoon working on a project I couldn't even name out loud thanks to a dozen non-disclosure agreements and a small badge with an eagle stamped on it. Let's just say my work involved encryption, signal isolation, and enough classified hardware to make any conspiracy theorist feel justified. Karen had been circling my property like a vulture with a clipboard ever since I moved in 2 years ago. First it was, "Your lawn isn't always standard grass." Then it was, "Your security lights are disturbing my dog's chakra alignment." Most recently, she claimed my shed was emitting suspicious energy. The only energy it emitted was Wi-Fi-free brilliance. But Karen didn't understand Faraday cages. She thought the world revolved around her yoga calendar and the HOA bylaws she weaponized like the Constitution. When the fire trucks arrived, I expected chaos, confusion, and maybe even tears. What I didn't expect was 2 unmarked black SUVs that pulled in silently behind the flashing ladder truck. Men in suits stepped out, moving with a type of calm that only comes from years of dealing with cartel members and international spies. They nodded at me and moved toward the remains of my shed without speaking to anyone else. One of them locked eyes with Karen for half a second. She froze mid-rant. That was the first crack in her smug mask. The second came when an agent muttered into his wrist mic, and 2 plainclothes officers began scanning the crowd with infrared equipment. Karen backed away slowly, clutching her coffee mug like a weaponized comfort blanket. The agents pulled me aside and asked questions. Rapid fire, technical, specific. They weren't interested in how the fire started. They already knew. They wanted confirmation that nothing critical had been lost, nothing that couldn't be reconstructed or traced. I told them everything had been backed up offsite, encrypted twice over. One of them smiled. "Good man," he said. "We'll handle the rest." That's when I knew this wasn't just a neighbor dispute anymore. This was going to be a case file, a real one, with surveillance logs, wiretaps, maybe even a stain. And Karen had just lit the fuse on her own personal downfall. I should have been angry, furious. My workshop was gone, thousands of dollars of equipment incinerated, my quiet life up in smoke. But watching Karen pace in circles, trying to come up with her next excuse, was oddly satisfying. She wasn't panicking yet. That would come later. Right now, she was still playing queen of the cul-de-sac, convinced she had saved the neighborhood from a dangerous rogue tech guy with his blinking lights and humming boxes. She had no idea those boxes were part of a communications blackout array being tested for high-risk deployment zones. She thought she destroyed a nuisance. What she actually destroyed was a federal testing site monitored under a joint agency program. And the best part, it had all been recorded. 3 months earlier, after I submitted a routine security request to the local police about break-ins, I was contacted by a low-key branch of the Bureau. They had been tracking odd theft patterns, specifically tech-related, across high-income suburbs. My workshop fit the bill as bait. They asked if I'd be willing to let them observe from nearby. In return, They'd boost my security and alert me to any real threat. I agreed. We installed cameras, pressure sensors, the works. I didn't know they'd stationed a van 2 houses away with full-time surveillance on the place, but now I was glad they had. Every move Karen made that night, every step up to the workshop, every flick of the lighter, caught in crystal clear resolution, time-stamped, audio verified. Back in the present, the flames had finally died. The fire crew was rolling hoses and inspecting smoldering wreckage. Karen tried to walk over, probably to gloat or offer a fake hug for the cameras, but the lead agent stopped her with a single raised hand. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to stay right there," he said, tone calm but sharp enough to pierce armor. Karen blinked. "Excuse me," she said, as if the FBI worked for her 808. The agent motioned to one of his colleagues, who approached her with a small recording device. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about your whereabouts this evening. For the record," her face went from peach to chalk. I was asleep. I just saw the fire," she stammered. "Actually," the agent said, flipping open a tablet and pressing play, "we have footage of someone matching your height and build entering the property at 12:43 a.m. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. By morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Karen's name was on everyone's lips, but not in admiration. Word spread fast, and someone inevitably leaked a snippet of the footage online, blurry but damning. It wasn't long before the memes started. Karen versus FBI, the final showdown. When HOA meets CIA, Lady Torch light strikes again. My phone buzzed nonstop. Some neighbors were horrified. Others sent coffee and muffins in solidarity. One guy even dropped off a Karen repellent spray bottle filled with glitter and vinegar. But I wasn't done. This wasn't revenge. It was only the beginning. Because what the FBI agents told me next about Karen's past, about other fires, about a possible insurance scam, changed everything. She wasn't just annoying. She was dangerous. And now she'd stepped into a world she couldn't scream her way out of. The investigation had begun. And this time, it wasn't the HOA in charge. It was the federal government. And I was ready to help them burn her entire operation to the ground. Metaphorically, of course. I'd had enough literal fires for one lifetime. The morning after the fire, the neighborhood was still buzzing like a hive rattled by a brick. I could hear murmurs from over fences, doorsteps, and through half-cracked windows. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neighbors, reporters, a city inspector, even my old college roommate who somehow saw a clip online. But the only people I was interested in talking to were the 2 agents waiting in my living room, sipping black coffee like it was just another Thursday morning and not the day after a federal surveillance operation was torched by a woman obsessed with bird feeders and property lines. The shorter agent, a guy named Mitchell, was flipping through a tablet with footage from the previous night. The clarity was surreal. Infrared night vision captured every step Karen had taken toward the workshop, including her clumsy attempt to hide behind a trash bin before lighting the accelerant. They asked if I'd ever seen her act suspicious before, and I almost laughed. Karen's default setting was suspicious. This was a woman who once filed a complaint because someone painted their mailbox too brightly and claimed it was causing migraines. She had an ongoing feud with the family across the street for letting their toddler draw hopscotch boxes in chalk. But apparently, her meddling wasn't just annoying. It was being connected to something much bigger. The agents told me in carefully vague language that there had been a pattern of neighborhood disturbances and accidental fires in other HOA communities within the region. Each case had something in common: a rapid jump in property insurance claims, a trail of unexplained sabotage, and a common HOA board member name, Karen Hollowell. I blinked when they said it. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor with a flair for drama. She was now being looked at as a suspect in a multi-state investigation into insurance fraud and property damage. The FBI had already been compiling a digital trail of her activity, from public statements to private HOA minutes where she pushed for renovations and cited safety concerns right before things mysteriously caught fire. They showed me screenshots from a forum where she posted anonymously, ranting about non-compliant homes and removing the weak elements from the community. That would have just sounded like unhinged Karen nonsense a week ago. Now it read like a manifesto. As the agents prepared to leave, they gave me instructions. Keep calm. Don't provoke her. Act like nothing happened. And most importantly, don't rebuild just yet. They were going to use the ruins of my workshop as part of a trap. It sounded like a movie plot, but I was in too deep to laugh at it. They even replaced one of the melted surveillance cams with a new prototype that looked like part of the burnt-out wreckage, but had better facial recognition and audio pickup. Karen, they said, would likely revisit the scene. People like her can't help but hover around the chaos they cause, trying to steer the narrative. And with her past coming to light, they needed one more undeniable moment on record, one more nail in her proverbial coffin. Later that afternoon, I sat on the front steps, watching the neighborhood as casually as I could. Karen hadn't shown her face since being questioned, which was suspicious in itself. This was a woman who normally strutted around the block twice a day like she was royalty on patrol. Now, radio silence. I saw her blinds twitch a few times though. I knew she was watching, probably trying to figure out if anyone believed her. It was just a coincidence act. What she didn't realize was that the Bureau had quietly tapped into her home security feed, not because of the fire, but because she'd been flagged months earlier in a different case involving misappropriated HOA funds. The fire just brought everything bubbling to the surface. Around sunset, I got a knock on the door. It was Travis, the neighbor 2 houses down. He handed me a 6-pack of local craft beer and said, "Heard about the fire. Just wanted to say you handled that better than I would have." I thanked him, and he lingered a moment. Then he asked if I ever heard the rumors about Karen and the HOA money. I told him I just started learning about that. He nodded and looked toward her house. "We had a landscaping budget of $30,000 last year. You see any new trees?" I shook my head. Travis smirked and said, "Exactly." Then he left with a wave, and I filed that under interesting witness statement number 1. That night, I rewatched some of the footage the agents had shared with me, particularly the part where Karen tripped over a rock and nearly dropped her bottle of accelerant. Her face, twisted in frustration, was all the evidence anyone with half a brain needed. But the agents needed more. They wanted her caught in the act again, more precise, more damning, and in a way that connected her to past incidents. I didn't know what was more surreal, the fact that my burned workshop was now bait in a federal sting, or that the woman who once screamed at me for using an electric screwdriver after 8:00 p.m. was now a prime suspect in an FBI case. The next day, Karen finally emerged. She wore a sun hat, oversized sunglasses, and held a yoga mat as if that gave her diplomatic immunity. She ignored everyone on the street and made a beeline for the HOA clubhouse. I knew what she was doing, trying to get ahead of the story. She probably spent a tale about how she tried to warn everyone and how the fire validated her concerns. But the agents had already intercepted her email logs. She had tried to send an anonymous tip to the local news with dramatic phrases like "Hero homeowner halts hacker plot" and "Deadly lab explodes in quiet suburb." It would have been hilarious if it wasn't borderline pathological. Later that evening, Agent Mitchell texted me a short update. "She's spiraling. Exactly where we want her." I stared at those words for a long time. Spiraling. That felt accurate. Karen wasn't just trying to dodge blame. She was trying to rewrite reality. But the walls were closing in, and she didn't even realize the script had already been flipped. The days ahead were going to be strange. I was part of something big now, and as much as I wanted to fix my shed and move on, I knew the job wasn't done. Karen was going to make another move, and this time, when she did, the cameras would be rolling, and the feds would be waiting. 3 days after the fire, it became clear that Karen wasn't just spiraling. She was detonating in slow motion. Her efforts to paint herself as the neighborhood's reluctant hero were not only failing, they were backfiring spectacularly. It started with an email blast she sent out through the HOA's mailing list, a half-literate screed about dangerous equipment and terrorist-level technology being stored in my workshop. She framed herself as a concerned patriot who had tried to protect the community from imminent disaster, conveniently omitting that she had trespassed, committed arson, and nearly torched an entire block. She even included a photoshopped image of my shed surrounded by cartoonish hazard symbols and what she claimed was evidence of illegal satellite communication. That was actually a barbecue thermometer. The neighborhood didn't buy it. In fact, several residents replied, all with biting sarcasm, memes, and one photo of Karen at the last HOA meeting asleep with a wine glass in her hand. But Karen didn't know when to quit. Embarrassment only seemed to embolden her. The more she was mocked, the louder she got. She began showing up at people's doorsteps unannounced, shoving pamphlets she printed at home into their mail slots about security risks and civilian surveillance programs. She insisted I was part of one. Neighbor called her behavior apocalyptic grandma energy, and the nickname stuck. Someone even changed the neighborhood WhatsApp group name to Apocalyptic Grandma's HOA Watch. Meanwhile, the FBI was enjoying front row seats. Their surveillance had expanded, and they'd placed a new listening device on the telephone pole outside Karen's home. I was allowed to listen to some of the audio captured on her devices, and it was a mix of wild accusations and barely comprehensible ramblings. She called one of her friends, presumably another HOA member, and began describing deep state experiments taking place inside suburban homes and claimed she had personally uncovered a rogue agent living next door. She described me as someone trained to blend in who didn't mow his lawn the right way and who never attended OHO barbecues. She framed that as suspicious behavior. Apparently, being socially selective and tech-savvy was now grounds for federal suspicion in Karen's world. The agents were amused, but also deeply interested, because as Karen became more unhinged, she also became more careless. That same day, they traced one of her old emails to a burner account that was previously flagged in an arson investigation across the state line. The pattern was eerily similar. A property deemed unsafe by Karen's standards, a campaign to drive the resident out, followed by a mysterious fire. Insurance money always followed, and she always managed to shift the blame onto faulty wiring or homeowner negligence. But this time, she hadn't just chosen the wrong target. She had chosen the worst possible one. I kept playing my part. I didn't engage, didn't reply to her slander, didn't rebuild anything visible. I made it look like I was shaken, like I was keeping my head down. But behind closed doors, I was helping the agents lay the next trap. They brought in a tech specialist who worked with me to wire a new device that looked like a replacement part for one of the old prototypes Karen had seen before. It would sit inside the burned shed, rigged to a pressure trigger and paired with a motion sensor. It wouldn't hurt anyone, but it would signal the agents immediately and begin recording from 3 angles as soon as the sensor tripped. They were betting she'd come back to finish the job, or at least snoop around again. I was betting the same. Then came the press. Somehow, a local blogger caught wind of the story. Not the FBI details, but the fire, the HOA drama, and the wild claims Karen was spreading. They showed up on my porch asking for a comment. I politely declined, but within hours, Karen had invited them to her home for a truth-telling session. She wore a scarf and sunglasses indoors and insisted the media wasn't ready to handle the real story. The resulting article was unintentionally comedic. It quoted her saying things like, "The shed hummed with unnatural frequencies, and I saw birds avoiding his roof for months." That's not natural. She claimed she was on a self-directed investigation based on dreams she'd been having. That quote alone turned into a viral TikTok sound. But there was one sentence in the article that made the agents pause. Karen had told the reporter she had more work to do, and that she'd already prepared the next phase. That wasn't just bizarre. It was dangerous. The agents tightened surveillance, placed a plainclothes car near her driveway, and even temporarily disabled her Wi-Fi to see if she tried to connect through an external device. She did. They logged her attempt to access an HOA spreadsheet that she no longer had clearance for. Within that document were budget requests she had submitted over the past year for safety upgrades and community resilience projects. None of the upgrades had been made, the funds unaccounted for. Now the case was evolving from arson to fraud. The agents brought in someone from the Financial Crimes Division. I watched them review years of HOA expenses, tracking suspicious withdrawals and shell transfers into Karen's personal account. It was almost cartoonish. She had even labeled one transaction plant replacement fee and deposited it at a casino ATM. Another was for patrol gas, even though the HOA didn't own a vehicle. The web was unraveling fast, and Karen had no idea how far she was entangled. That evening, as I stepped outside to pretend to water the lawn, I saw her again. She was across the street, holding her phone low, trying to angle it toward my house. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. She stared with the kind of focused contempt you only see in courtroom dramas. I just smiled because I knew what was coming, and so did the agents monitoring from the van behind me, watching her every move, just waiting for her to cross that line one final time. By the fifth day, Karen was practically vibrating with frustration. The workshop ruins still sat like a charred skeleton at the edge of my property, and despite her best efforts to rally the neighborhood with scare tactics, most residents had turned against her. She couldn't stand it. She had expected the fire to trigger outrage against me and cement her status as the community savior. Instead, it made her the village lunatic, and the more she tried to control the narrative, the faster it unraveled. But the one thing Karen didn't understand, couldn't understand, was that all her moves were now being anticipated. Her descent into madness wasn't just tragic, it was strategic. The FBI had predicted this spiral, and every step she took brought her closer to the point of no return. That afternoon, I got a quiet text from Agent Mitchell. "She's moving tonight," it read. "Be ready. Don't intervene." I stared at those words for a moment, heart thudding. It was finally happening. Operation Burnout was officially live. Earlier in the week, the FBI had embedded a new decoy inside the half-reconstructed frame of my workshop. It looked like a power array wrapped in thick cables and copper shielding, exactly the kind of thing that would poke Karen's paranoia like a stick in a wasp's nest. The agents had even left a deliberately misplaced set of blueprints in my trash can, visible from the sidewalk. They were fake, of course, but they looked official, stamped, coded, and marked restricted prototype housing. It was irresistible bait, and Karen had been circling it like a shark that smelled blood. As night fell, I turned off all the exterior lights as instructed. From inside, I could see her house across the street, lit only by the eerie glow of a living room lamp. At 12:14 a.m., her front door cracked open. She stepped out wearing all black, a beanie pulled low, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. She moved cautiously, hugging the hedges as if she were invisible. I watched her from my bedroom window, holding my breath. A low hum buzzed in my ear, a tiny earpiece connected to the agents in the surveillance van. "She's on the move," someone said, their voice smooth and calm. Approach confirmed. Karen crept across the lawn, ducking behind bushes, scanning with a flashlight covered by red cellophane to reduce visibility. If she hadn't been the literal villain in this situation, it might have been funny, like watching a bad heist movie on fast forward. She paused at the edge of the workshop's remains, staring at the device that looked like a power converter mounted on a steel frame. Her fingers twitched as she pulled something from her bag, a matchbook, another bottle of accelerant. The agents weren't going to stop her just yet. They needed her to commit completely, undeniably, and on record. She knelt and started pouring the liquid, drenching the fake device with it. I could hear every splash through the earpiece. One agent's voice whispered, "Recording initiated. Camera 3 has angle. Let her strike." I couldn't believe this was real, that this HOA feud had escalated into an actual federal sting operation. But there she was, lighting a match with the care of someone who truly believed she was doing a public service. As she held it up, the agent finally gave the command, "Go." From the shadows, 3 agents emerged like ghosts. One grabbed her arm just as the flame neared the device. She screamed, a high-pitched, animalistic sound, and dropped the match. It fizzled on impact. 2 other agents secured her arms and pulled her away, shouting clear and authoritative commands. "Karen Hollowell, you are under arrest for arson, tampering with federal property, and interfering with an active surveillance site. You have the right to remain silent." She didn't. She screamed about being set up, about conspiracies, about being the only one who saw the truth. Her words were a jumbled storm of nonsense flung in every direction, Neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the noise. One woman filmed the arrest from her porch and uploaded it before the night was over. Karen was shoved into the back of an unmarked SUV, kicking and howling like a banshee. Her mugshot would be trending within hours. The aftermath was even wilder. With Karen in custody, the FBI released parts of their case to local law enforcement and the district attorney. She wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance anymore. She was officially linked to at least 3 prior suspicious fires, one of which had caused $500,000 in damage to a senior living complex. They found digital records connecting her to fake identities used to push FOA board votes in several counties. She had set up dummy accounts to siphon funds from neighborhood budgets and disguise her arson attacks as unfortunate coincidences that boosted insurance payouts. She had been running her own criminal operation from her living room, disguised as a crusader for community values. The neighborhood reeled. HOA leadership collapsed within days. The board members either resigned in disgrace or were forced out under federal review. An emergency election was held, and for once, sane people won. One of the first motions passed was a community apology issued to me, signed by over 24 families. Another was the dissolution of Karen's beloved Property Aesthetic Oversight Committee, which had existed solely to let her bully anyone who didn't conform to her taste. A week later, I stood in front of the rebuilt frame of my workshop, shaking hands with the lead agent who had overseen the stain. He handed me a folder. Inside were declassified stills of Karen's arrest, a letter of commendation for my cooperation, and a sealed envelope marked Federal Partnership Recognition. He said, "You handled this better than most people with a badge would have." I nodded, still overwhelmed. He added, "You ever think about working in cybercrime investigation?" I laughed and said, "Not until my neighbor tried to blow up my shed." The irony still wasn't lost on me. The woman who used to scream about my wind chimes being too modern had been taken down by her own inability to mind her business. And in doing so, she exposed herself as a fraud, a criminal, and an arsonist. She thought she was setting fire to a problem. What she actually did was ignite a federal investigation that burned down her entire world. The weeks that followed Karen's arrest felt like living in an entirely different neighborhood. The air felt lighter, like the tension that had loomed over the block for years had finally lifted. People who used to avoid eye contact now waved when they passed by. Kids played freely on the sidewalks again without their parents worrying about being reported for excessive noise. Even the old guy with the wind spinner collection put them all back up in his yard with pride, like a battle flag returned to its rightful place. The silence that had once been enforced by fear now existed in peace. Karen was gone, and with her, so was the reign of madness she cloaked in bylaws and bogus fines. My workshop was finally rebuilt, though this time with more concrete, steel reinforcements, and security tech that would make a bank jealous. The FBI had been surprisingly generous with their help. Not only did they assist in installing upgraded surveillance hardware, but they also coordinated with a private defense tech firm that agreed to sponsor a portion of my work as part of an independent research initiative. Turns out my encrypted relay project had impressed a few people higher up the ladder, and suddenly I wasn't just the weird neighbor with blinking lights. I was a verified asset in a low-tier defense project. I didn't get a badge or anything, but the new equipment came with paperwork that gave my workshop a new legal classification. That meant any future nosy neighbors trying to meddle would be stepping into restricted territory without realizing it. I had become Karen-proof by design. The neighborhood HOA was dissolved and restructured under new leadership. Travis, the guy who brought me beer after the fire, was elected president. He was the kind of guy who believed in barbecues over bureaucracy. His first act as president was to burn the old violation log in a fire pit during the community's first HOA-free weekend cookout. I attended with a folding chair and a plate full of ribs. People kept coming up to thank me, which felt strange at first. I hadn't asked for any of this. I just wanted to be left alone to build, create, and enjoy my privacy. But now people saw me as the reason they could finally breathe easy in their own homes. I guess that's what happens when the neighborhood menace turns out to be a felon and the quiet guy turns out to be an ally of the FBI. Karen's trial date was set for the fall. Until then, she was being held without bail due to the flight risk and the severity of her charges. More evidence kept surfacing as the investigation expanded. Bank records, burner phone logs, voice recordings. It was like every move she'd ever made was finally catching up with her all at once. She wasn't just facing arson anymore. She was looking at federal fraud charges, racketeering, identity theft, misuse of community funds, and tampering with federal evidence. One of the agents who kept in touch told me she was already negotiating a plea deal, trying to shift blame onto phantom co-conspirators and claiming she'd been manipulated by someone else into starting the fires. No one was buying it. Meanwhile, my life moved forward. I spent most mornings tinkering with code and hardware in the new lab, sipping strong coffee while classical music played in the background. It was peaceful in a way that felt almost earned. The surveillance equipment remained active, though it was now mainly used to test my new devices. Once, a stray cat set off the sensors, and I nearly jumped out of my skin before laughing at myself. After what I'd been through, I had every reason to be on edge. But instead, I felt calmer than I had in years. Maybe because the worst had already happened, and it didn't break me. The story had, of course, gone viral. A Reddit user had uploaded the local news segment about Karen's arrest to the Entitled People subreddit with the title "HOA Karen tried to burn my workshop. Didn't know the FBI was watching." The post blew up. Thousands of comments poured in, some shocked, some hilarious. People shared their own HOA horror stories and cheered at Karen's downfall like it was the season finale of a show they'd been following for months. One user even drew a comic strip of Karen being arrested by agents with FBI written in glitter across their jackets. It was surreal to see my own life turned into meme material, but also kind of therapeutic. The internet had taken the chaos and turned it into comedy, and honestly, after everything, it felt good to laugh. As a final touch, I installed a large wooden sign right outside the entrance to the new workshop. It was made of reclaimed oak, with the words burned in carefully with a laser engraver. Federal site. Surveillance active. Karen-free zone. A neighbor added a plastic eagle to the top as a joke. Every time someone new moved into the neighborhood, someone else would walk them over and point at the sign like it was a landmark. It wasn't just a warning. It was a story carved into wood. There was one last surprise, though. A few weeks after the rebuild was complete, I got a letter in the mail. It came from the Department of Justice. Inside was an official thank you for my cooperation and patience during the investigation. There was also a check, not a huge one, but enough to cover part of the damages, plus a personal note signed by the field agent who ran the operation. It read, "Most civilians would have panicked. You kept your cool, stayed smart, and helped us bring down someone dangerous. That matters. Thank you." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a frame on the wall above my new workbench. It wasn't a trophy, but it felt like closure. Proof that even in the most absurd, flaming, Karen-infested situations, sometimes the good guys really do win. And from that point forward, every time I saw a nosy neighbor glance at my property a little too long, I didn't worry. I just smiled, waved, and let them know this house had already been through a fire, a stain, and an FBI takedown. If anyone else wanted to try something stupid, they'd better come with a badge or a really good lawyer, because Karen's saga was over and mine was just getting started.